The black female nurse was fired for saving a dying angel ghost rider. An hour later, love and danger knocked on her door. Nurse Aaliyah Johnson stared at the termination letter in her trembling hands as the man she'd risked everything to save sat on the hospital bed behind her. And when he whispered, "I wasn't supposed to let you lose everything for me," she realized saving a dying angel had cost her career, but might have saved her soul. Welcome back, my lovelies. Get ready for a story that will leave you speechless and make you believe in the power of destiny. Stay with me until the very end because this story will restore your faith in humanity. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and comment your thoughts throughout the story. Your engagement helps us bring you more incredible narratives. When duty becomes defiance. 11:43 p.m., Birmingham General Hospital ER. The fluorescent lights of Birmingham General's emergency department buzzed with the same relentless intensity that had marked Aaliyah Johnson's 12-hour shift. As one of only 3 black nurses in the trauma unit, she'd learned to work twice as hard, stay twice as professional, and bite her tongue twice as often as her white colleagues. At 28, Aaliyah had built her reputation on competence and unshakable calm under pressure. She was the nurse doctors requested for their most difficult cases, the one who could start in 4 on a combative drunk or talk a suicide attempt back from the edge. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, in this world, you got to be twice as good to get half as much. But that don't mean you stop being good." The motorcycle accident victim had arrived 20 minutes ago. White male, approximately 30, extensive road rash, possible internal bleeding. The paramedics had done their job, but now he was just another John Doe waiting for a bed to open up in the ICU. Except something was wrong. Aaliyah checked his chart again, frowning at vitals that made no medical sense. His heartbeat was too steady for someone who'd been thrown from a bike at highway speeds. His breathing was too controlled. And when she'd checked his pupils earlier, she could have sworn she'd seen something that looked like silver fire flickering in the depths of his storm-gray eyes. "Johnson," Dr. Rebecca Hartman's voice cut through the controlled chaos of the ER like a scalpel. "Room 7 needs vitals, and the insurance verification on the motorcycle victim just came back declined. Move him to the charity ward." Aaliyah looked up from the computer where she'd been documenting the John Doe's impossibly normal test results. Dr. Hartman stood with her arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the perpetual look of irritation she wore whenever she had to interact with the hospital's minority staff. "His condition isn't stable enough for transfer," Aaliyah said carefully. "He needs monitoring. He needs to stop taking up a trauma bed that paying patients require," Dr. Hartman interrupted. "Move him. Now." Through the glass partition, Aaliyah could see the man in question. Even unconscious, even battered and bleeding, there was something compelling about him. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was more than physical attractiveness. There was something that called to her, something that made every instinct she'd developed in 5 years of emergency nursing scream that this man was important. "I'll need to get Dr. Williams to sign off on the transfer," she said, referring to the attending physician who'd initially examined the patient. "Dr. Williams is in surgery. I'm the attending on duty, and I'm ordering the transfer." Dr. Hartman's voice carried the particular edge that meant she was done with discussion. "Unless you'd like to explain to the chief of staff why you're questioning my medical judgment." The threat was clear. Aaliyah had already been written up twice this year. Once for insubordination, when she'd questioned a medication dosage that would have killed a pediatric patient, and once for unprofessional conduct, when she'd refused to discharge a domestic violence victim back to her abuser without proper safety planning. 3 strikes, and she'd be out of a job. In a city where nursing positions for someone with her attitude problems were scarce, that would mean starting over somewhere else. Again. But as she looked at the man lying motionless on the trauma bed, something her grandmother had told her echoed louder than Dr. Hartman's threats. "Sometimes, baby girl, doing right is more important than doing safe." "I'll move him," Aaliyah said quietly. "But I'm documenting my objections in his chart." Dr. Hartman's smile was sharp as surgical steel. "You do that, Johnson. You document whatever makes you feel better." Meanwhile, in the space between conscious and unconscious, Kai Ashworth was dying. Not the quick, merciful death that came with mortal injuries, but the slow dissolution that happened when a celestial being's essence began to unravel. He'd been falling for 3 days now. Not physically, but spiritually, his connection to the divine hierarchy severing one thread at a time. The motorcycle crash had been the final insult. After refusing to eliminate the child prophet Emma Martinez, after being stripped of his rank and cast out of heaven's grace, he'd thought the worst was behind him. But divine punishment, he'd learned, had a way of compounding itself. I wasn't supposed to fall here, he thought dimly, awareness flickering in and out like a candle in a hurricane. I wasn't supposed to involve innocence. But through the haze of pain and disconnection, he could sense something unexpected, warmth. Not the cold fire of divine judgment, but something human and real and infinitely precious. Someone was fighting for him. Someone with gentle hands and a voice that carried the authority of compassion made manifest. Don't let her suffer for this, he prayed to whatever powers might still be listening. Don't let her pay the price for saving someone like me. But even as the thought formed, he could feel the cosmic gears shifting. Divine retribution already moving to punish anyone foolish enough to show mercy to a fallen angel. If you've made it this far into the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us keep bringing you more heartwarming stories like this one. 12:47 a.m., Charity Ward. Moving the John Doe had taken 40 minutes and 3 orderlies, not because he was difficult to transport, but because his condition kept fluctuating in ways that defied medical explanation. Twice during the transfer, his heart rate had dropped to levels that should have triggered coding protocols. Twice, it had stabilized just as Aaliyah reached for the crash cart. Now he lay in a bed in the Charity Ward, a section of the hospital that everyone pretended provided adequate care, while knowing it was where poor patients came to die with dignity, but without resources. Aaliyah finished checking his 4-line and was preparing to return to the ER when his eyes opened. They were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and deep enough to drown in. For a moment they were unfocused, confused. Then they locked onto hers, and something shifted in the world around them. The fluorescent lights flickered. The monitors in the room hummed with harmonic frequencies that belonged in a cathedral, not a hospital. "Angel," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and wonder. "Are you an angel?" Despite everything, the stress of her shift, the confrontation with Dr. Hartman, the impossibility of his medical condition, Aaliyah found herself smiling. "No, honey. But maybe you are." His laugh was weak but genuine. "Not anymore." "What's your name?" she asked, checking his pulse automatically. Still impossibly strong and steady. "Kai," he said, then paused as if surprised by his own answer. "Kai Ashworth. And you're the woman who's about to lose everything because she saved my life." The certainty in his voice made her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Kai said, struggling to sit up despite her attempts to keep him still, "that helping me comes with consequences. And you're about to find out what they are." As if summoned by his words, Dr. Hartman appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 hospital security guards and carrying a manila envelope that Aaliyah recognized with sinking dread. "Miss Johnson," Dr. Hartman said with barely concealed satisfaction, "we need to talk. What would you risk your career for? Sometimes the most important choices happen when no one is watching. Have you ever stood up for what's right, even when it cost you everything? Share your thoughts below." 1:02 a.m., Hospital Administration Office. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Aaliyah sat in the sterile administrative office, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her tired face. Dr. Hartman sat behind the desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict, while the 2 security guards flanked the door as if Aaliyah were a flight risk. "Miss Johnson," Dr. Hartman began, pulling papers from the envelope with theatrical precision. "It has come to our attention that you have repeatedly violated hospital protocols regarding patient care decisions." Aaliyah kept her voice steady despite the fear climbing her throat. "I followed proper nursing procedures for an unstable patient. You questioned the medical judgment of an attending physician. You delayed a direct order to transfer a patient. And according to this incident report, you were observed having inappropriate personal conversation with said patient." Dr. Hartman held up a sheet of paper like evidence in a criminal trial. "Behavior that violates our professional conduct standards. Inappropriate personal conversation?" Aaliyah's professionalism cracked slightly. "I asked his name. That's standard patient care. The security footage shows you smiling, Miss Johnson. Laughing even. With a patient who, for all you knew, could have been under the influence of drugs or suffering from head trauma that affected his judgment." Dr. Hartman leaned forward, her expression predatory. That kind of unprofessional familiarity is exactly why this hospital has had to implement stricter guidelines for certain members of our staff. Certain members. The code words hung in the air like poison gas. Aaliyah had heard them before, usually preceding disciplinary actions that seemed to disproportionately affect the hospital's Black and Latino employees. "What are you saying, Dr. Hartman?" "I'm saying," Dr. Hartman replied, sliding another document across the desk, "that Birmingham General has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit Aaliyah like physical blows. 5 years of exemplary service, countless lives saved, commendations from patients and families. All of it reduced to a termination letter that cited failure to follow medical directives and unprofessional conduct. "You can't be serious," Aaliyah whispered. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," Dr. Hartman continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Your final paycheck will be mailed within 2 weeks, minus any outstanding obligations to the hospital." "This is about race," Aaliyah said, finding her voice and her anger simultaneously. "You've been looking for an excuse to get rid of me since the day I started here, and you know it." Dr. Hartman's smile was arctic. "That's a very serious accusation, Miss Johnson. I'd be careful about making statements you can't prove, especially when you're about to need references for your next position." The threat was clear. Accept the termination quietly, or face a campaign of professional destruction that would follow her wherever she tried to work. It was the same choice faced by countless other healthcare workers who dared to challenge a system that prioritized profit over patients, hierarchy over healing. But as Aaliyah stared at the termination letter, she thought of the man lying in the charity ward, Kai Ashworth, who'd looked at her like she was something precious and warned her that helping him would cost her everything. He'd been right, but somehow, that didn't make her regret her choice. "I want this in writing," she said finally. "All of it. The reasons for termination, the incident reports, everything." "Of course," Dr. Hartman replied, already shuffling the papers back into the envelope. "Your copies are included." 1:34 a.m., Charity Ward. Aaliyah made one last stop before security escorted her from the building. Kai was awake when she entered his room, sitting up in bed despite the IVs and monitoring equipment. In the dim lighting, she could see that his injuries were healing at an impossible rate. The road rash on his arms had faded to pink marks, and the gash on his forehead was now just a thin line. "They fired you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She sat in the visitor's chair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything that had happened. For questioning medical judgment and having inappropriate personal conversation with a patient. "I'm sorry." The pain in his voice was genuine, raw. "I tried to warn you, but I made my choice," Aaliyah interrupted. "Just like you made yours when you helped whoever it was that got you in trouble in the first place." Kai was quiet for a moment, studying her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That I was in trouble for helping someone." Aaliyah considered this, searching for words to explain the certainty that had settled in her bones. "The same way I knew you weren't just another motorcycle accident. The same way I knew that moving you to the charity ward was wrong, even when it meant losing my job." "And what way is that?" "Instinct. The kind my grandmother used to call soul-knowing. When your heart recognizes something your mind hasn't figured out yet." Kai reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm, electric and soothing at the same time. His skin was warmer than it should be, and she could swear she felt energy flowing between them, like touching a live wire that healed instead of harmed. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what you really are." So he did. He told her about heaven, not the peaceful paradise of Sunday school lessons, but a vast, militant hierarchy that governed the divine order of creation. He told her about his role as a seraphim, one of heaven's elite warriors, carrying out divine justice without question or mercy for over 2 centuries. 3 weeks ago," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her knuckles, "I was given an order I couldn't follow. There was a child, a little girl named Emma Martinez, living with her grandmother in Detroit. According to divine prophecy, she would grow up to be a bridge between worlds, someone who could unite different faiths and challenge the absolute authority of the celestial hierarchy. So they ordered you to kill her. They ordered me to eliminate a future threat to divine order." His voice was flat, but Aaliyah could see the pain in his eyes. "I went to Detroit. I found the house. I watched her through the window, 7 years old, helping her Abuela bake cookies for the church bake sale. But you couldn't do it. I couldn't even get out of my car." Kai's hand tightened on hers. "For 2 centuries, I followed orders without question. But looking at that little girl, All I could think was that any god who would order the death of innocents to preserve authority wasn't a god worth serving. So you refused. I refused. And they stripped me of my rank, my immortality, my place in the celestial hierarchy. But they didn't just banish me, they marked me for termination. Other angels, ones still loyal to the old order, have been hunting me ever since. Aaliyah absorbed this information with the same clinical calm she brought to medical emergencies. Angels weren't part of her worldview. She'd grown up Baptist, but her faith had always been more about community and social justice than supernatural intervention. But looking at Kai, feeling the energy that radiated from his touch, seeing wounds heal at impossible speed, she found herself believing every word. "The others hunting you," she said. "How close are they?" "Close enough that being in a hospital puts everyone here at risk. Close enough that I should leave before." The lights went out, not just in Kai's room, but throughout the entire charity ward. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made shadows dance across the walls like living things. In the distance, Aaliyah could hear the sound of alarms beginning to wail. "They're here," Kai said, struggling to get out of bed despite the 4 lines still attached to his arms. "Who's here?" "My former brothers. And they're not known for their restraint when it comes to collateral damage." Through the room's small window, Aaliyah could see figures moving in the parking lot, tall, impossibly graceful forms that seemed to glide rather than walk. Even at a distance, there was something wrong about them, something that made her primitive brain scream warnings about predators and prey. "We need to get everyone out of here," she said, her nursing training overriding her fear. "Aaliyah, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." She stood up, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the hospital's most respected trauma nurses. "There are 12 patients on this ward plus staff. If your angel friends are as dangerous as you say, then we get these people to safety before we worry about anything else." Kai stared at her for a moment, something like awe crossing his features. Most people would run. Most people didn't just lose their career for doing the right thing. Aaliyah moved to the window, studying the approaching figures. "Besides, my grandmother always said that when trouble comes calling, you either stand up or get knocked down. I'm tired of getting knocked down." The building shuddered as someone, struck the main entrance with enough force to crack the reinforced glass. The emergency alarms grew louder, more urgent, and Aaliyah could hear voices in the hallway as staff began evacuation procedures. "There's a service elevator at the end of the hall," she said, already moving toward the door. "If we can get the patients down to the basement level, there's a tunnel that connects to the parking garage across the street." "They'll sense me wherever I go," Kai warned, finally pulling the 4 from his arm. "As long as I'm using any kind of celestial power, they can track me." "Then don't use celestial power. Use human power." Aaliyah turned back to him, her dark eyes blazing with determination. "Use love." The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Love, not the cosmic, impersonal love that governed divine hierarchies, but something immediate and personal and utterly human. "Aaliyah, I don't know what this is between us," she said, her hand finding his again. "I don't know if it's real or just adrenaline or some kind of supernatural influence. But I know that you're worth fighting for, and I know that those people out there need someone to fight for them too." The building shuddered again, and this time the lights didn't come back on at all. "Together?" Kai asked. "Together," Aaliyah confirmed. They moved toward the door as the sound of breaking glass echoed through the hospital corridors, and somewhere in the darkness, voices that had never known doubt began to sing with harmonies that could shatter stone. But louder than the angelic chorus, stronger than divine authority, was the sound of Aaliyah Johnson's voice calling out to terrified patients and overwhelmed staff. "This way! Follow my voice. Nobody gets left behind." And in that moment, Kai understood something about love that 2 centuries of celestial service had never taught him. That it wasn't about protection or possession, but about choice. About standing beside someone when the world was ending and choosing to face it together. The hunt had found them. But they weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. Have you ever lost something important while trying to do what's right? Sometimes the cost of compassion is higher than we expect, but the alternative, staying silent, costs even more. What would you sacrifice to save a stranger? 2:07 a.m., Birmingham General Hospital, Charity Ward. The corridor stretched before them like a war zone painted in emergency lighting. Aaliyah moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 5 years navigating medical crises, But nothing in her training had prepared her for the otherworldly cold that preceded the approaching angels, or the way the hospital's concrete walls groaned under pressure that shouldn't exist. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to help your roommate to the wheelchair," she called to an elderly woman who was clutching her four-pole like a lifeline. "Mr. Rodriguez, can you walk on your own?" Behind her, Kai moved through the evacuation with surprising gentleness for someone who'd spent centuries as heaven's enforcer. He lifted patients who couldn't walk, guided confused elderly residents toward the service elevator, his voice calm and reassuring despite the supernatural storm bearing down on them. But Aaliyah could see the cost of his restraint. Every time he helped someone, every time he used strength that was more than human, silver light flickered beneath his skin like lightning trapped under glass. Whatever tracking system the hunting angels used, he was lighting up like a beacon with every act of mercy. "The elevator's not working," called James, one of the night orderlies who'd stayed behind to help with the evacuation. "Something's interfering with the electrical systems." Through the windows at the end of the hall, Aaliyah could see why. The parking lot was filled with figures that hurt to look at directly, beings of such perfect beauty and terrible authority that her eyes kept sliding away from them like oil on water. They stood in formation around the hospital, their presence warping reality in ways that made streetlights flicker and car alarms wail in the distance. "Stairwell," she decided. "We take them down the stairwell one at a time." "Aaliyah," Kai said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "There are 15 of them. Seraphim, cherubim, maybe even one of the thrones. This isn't a hunting party anymore. This is an army. Then we better move fast." But as they began guiding the first group of patients toward the stairwell, the building's main entrance exploded inward with a sound like the world cracking open. Glass and concrete showered the lobby 3 floors below, and through the breach came a figure that made the others look almost human by comparison. Gabriel, Archangel, commander of heaven's hosts and executor of divine will. His voice, when it came, didn't travel through air but through the fundamental structure of reality itself, making every soul in the building resonate like a struck tuning fork. "Kai Ashworth, by order of the Council of 7, you will surrender yourself for judgment. Any mortal who continues to aid you will be considered complicit in rebellion against divine authority." The patients around them began to weep. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the overwhelming presence of absolute judgment made manifest. Several dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the proximity to something their minds couldn't process. "Keep moving," Aaliyah said firmly, though her own knees felt like water. "Don't look at them. Don't listen to them. Just keep moving." But Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman with diabetes who'd been scheduled for surgery in the morning, suddenly stopped walking. "I can see them," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "Oh my Lord, I can see them. They're so beautiful. They're so—" "Mrs. Patterson," Aaliyah said urgently, recognizing the signs of someone falling under divine influence. "Stay with me. Focus on my voice." But the old woman was already turning toward the stairwell that led down to the lobby, drawn by the angelic presence like a moth to flame. And she wasn't the only one. Half the patients they'd been evacuating were now moving in the wrong direction, compelled by something deeper than conscious thought. "Aaliyah." Kai's hand found her shoulder, his touch warm against the supernatural cold that was filling the building. "I have to stop this. If I surrender, they'll let the mortals go." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended, powered by the same stubborn determination that had gotten her fired for questioning medical orders. "You don't get to make that choice for me. For any of us. They'll kill everyone in this building to get to me. Then we don't let them get to you." She turned to face him fully, ignoring the chaos around them. The weeping patients, the approaching angels, the building itself groaning under pressure that violated the laws of physics. In the red emergency lighting, Kai looked exactly like what he was. A warrior who'd spent too many years following orders, suddenly asked to make choices that had no good outcomes. "You told me about the little girl," Aaliyah said. "Emma, the one you saved by refusing to follow orders." "Yes. What would happen to her if you surrender? If you let them drag you back to face their justice?" Kai's expression darkened. "They'd probably send someone else to finish what I couldn't. And what about the next child? And the one after that?" Aaliyah stepped closer, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent her career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "You think this ends with you? You think they stop hunting anyone who challenges their authority just because they make an example of one fallen angel?" The building shuddered again as Gabriel's forces began their ascent, no longer content to wait for surrender. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Aaliyah replied, "that sometimes running just means they catch someone else. Sometimes the only way to protect people is to stop being afraid of the consequences." She looked around at the patients and staff, who were caught in the middle of a cosmic conflict they'd never asked to be part of. Mrs. Patterson was now halfway to the stairwell, moving with the jerky determination of someone under supernatural compulsion. 3 other patients were following her, their eyes glazed with the same terrifying peace. "James," she called to the orderly who was trying to physically restrain a patient from walking toward certain death. "The medication storage room. Do you have the access codes?" "Yeah, but I need you to get me a crash cart, 2 bags of normal saline, and every ampoule of epinephrine we have in stock." "Aaliyah, what are you planning?" She was already moving, her mind racing through possibilities that would have seemed insane 24 hours ago. But 24 hours ago, she'd been a nurse who followed protocols and kept her head down. Now she was something else, something that had been forged in the moment she'd chosen to save a stranger despite the cost. "If they want to use divine influence to control people's minds," she said, "then we level the playing field." She reached the medication storage room and began pulling supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd run 1,000 medical emergencies. Epinephrine, adrenaline, the human body's natural response to fight or flight situations. In controlled doses, it could counteract sedation, shock, even certain types of cardiac arrest. In slightly larger doses, administered to people under supernatural influence, it might just snap them back to awareness long enough to get them to safety. "This is insane," James said, but he was already helping her load the crash cart. "Probably," Aaliyah agreed. "But I'm tired of Sane. Sane got me fired for doing my job. Sane would let those people walk to their deaths because challenging authority is too dangerous." She looked back down the corridor, where Kai was now physically restraining patients who were trying to answer Gabriel's call, his face a mask of barely controlled desperation. "Besides," she added, drawing the first dose of epinephrine into a syringe, "someone once told me that love is its own kind of power. Time to find out if that's true." The building's lights went out completely as Gabriel reached the 2nd floor, his presence so overwhelming that the hospital's electrical systems simply gave up. In the darkness, Aaliyah could hear the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and strong despite the terror that should have been paralyzing her. But stronger than fear was something else. The same instinct that had made her question Dr. Hartman's orders, the same soul-deep certainty that had led her to save a stranger despite the consequences. The knowledge that some fights were worth losing everything for. "Mrs. Patterson," she called, moving toward the elderly woman with the loaded syringe. "I'm going to give you something to help with the confusion." The injection was quick and professional, administered with the same competence she'd brought to thousands of medical procedures. Within seconds, Mrs. Patterson's eyes cleared, the supernatural compulsion breaking like a fever. "Nurse Johnson," the old woman said, blinking in confusion. "What? Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Aaliyah replied, already moving toward the next patient. "Just stay close to me." But as she reached for the 2nd syringe, a new voice cut through the darkness, cold, beautiful, and absolutely without mercy. "How fascinating," Gabriel said from the stairwell entrance. "The mortal thinks she can fight divine will with chemistry." The archangel stepped into the corridor, and reality bent around him like light around a black hole. He was beautiful in the way that avalanches were beautiful, terrible and perfect and absolutely destructive. His wings filled the space from floor to ceiling, and his eyes held the weight of divine judgment that had shaped the fate of worlds. "Kai Ashworth," Gabriel continued, his gaze finding the fallen angel who had moved protectively in front of the remaining patients. "Your rebellion ends here." "Actually," Aaliyah said, stepping between Gabriel and Kai with the kind of casual bravery that came from having nothing left to lose, "I think it's just getting started." She raised the syringe toward her own arm, the needle glinting in the otherworldly light that emanated from Gabriel's presence. "One more step," she said clearly, "and I inject myself with enough epinephrine to put me in cardiac arrest. And then you get to explain to your council why divine justice required the death of a nurse who was just trying to save lives." Gabriel paused, something like surprise crossing his perfect features. "You would kill yourself to protect a fallen angel?" "I would die to protect anyone who needs protecting," Aaliyah replied. "That's what we do down here in the mortal realm. We look out for each other." The standoff stretched between them. Divine authority against human compassion, cosmic law against the stubborn refusal to abandon those who couldn't defend themselves. And in that moment, Kai Ashworth understood something about love that 2 centuries of celestial service had never taught him. It wasn't about power or possession or even protection. It was about choice, the choice to stand beside someone when the world was ending and face whatever came together. "Gabriel," he said, his voice carrying a new kind of authority, not divine, but deeply human. "You want me? You can have me. But not here. Not around innocence." "Kai, no," Aaliyah started. "Not surrender," he clarified, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers with absolute certainty. "Challenge. Single combat, as is my right under celestial law. Winner takes all." Gabriel's smile was sharp as a blade. "And if you lose?" "If I lose, you get what you came for. But if I win?" Kai looked around at the patients and staff who had somehow become his responsibility, his family, his reason for fighting. "Everyone goes free. No retribution, no hunting anyone who helped me. Clean slate." "And where do you propose this combat take place?" Kai's answer was immediate. "The roof. Under the open sky, where heaven can bear witness." Gabriel considered this, his ancient mind weighing the implications of formal challenge versus simple execution. "Very well," he said finally. "But know this, brother. I will not show mercy because you've learned to feel human emotions." "I wouldn't expect you to," Kai replied. Then to Aaliyah, "Get them out. All of them. Don't wait to see how this ends." But as he turned toward the stairwell that led to the roof, Aaliyah caught his hand. "Together," she said simply. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." The rooftop of Birmingham General stretched out like an arena under a sky that had forgotten how to be normal. Stars burned too bright, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly, while clouds moved with the deliberate precision of celestial choreography. The air itself hummed with tension, as if reality was holding its breath. Aaliyah stood at Kai's side, her hand still clasped in his, refusing to retreat despite Gabriel's towering presence and the circle of seraphim who had taken positions around the rooftop's perimeter. Their wings created walls of living light, ensuring that whatever happened here would be witnessed by heaven but hidden from mortal eyes. "Dr. Johnson," Gabriel said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the hospital's satellite dishes vibrate, "this is not your fight." "It became my fight the moment I chose to save him," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady despite the cosmic forces arrayed against them. "And it's Nurse Johnson. I may be unemployed, but I earned that title." Gabriel's expression shifted. Not quite amusement, but something that might have been respect. "You understand that mortal flesh cannot survive proximity to true celestial combat? Then I guess we better make sure the combat doesn't last long." Behind them, the rooftop access door burst open as James and 2 other staff members began evacuating the last of the patients to the hospital's emergency shelter. Aaliyah could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice, stronger now after the epinephrine had broken the angelic compulsion. "That nurse saved us all. Don't you forget that." "Good," Aaliyah thought. "They're safe. Whatever happens now, they're safe." "The terms," Gabriel announced, spreading his wings to their full span. "Easily 20 feet from tip to tip, each feather sharp enough to cut through steel. Single combat between myself and the traitor Kai Ashworth. Victory by death, surrender, or divine judgment. No interference from mortal or immortal witnesses." "Agreed," Kai said, releasing Aaliyah's hand and stepping forward. As he moved, something extraordinary happened. His torn hospital gown began to shift and change, transforming into armor that looked like it had been forged from starlight and shadow. Not the pristine white of active seraphim, but something new, something that spoke of choices made and prices paid. "Kai," Aaliyah said urgently, "you're hurt. You're not at full strength." "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, his voice carrying a certainty that hadn't been there during his fall from grace. "For the first time in 2 centuries, I'm fighting for something I believe in." Gabriel drew his sword, not a physical blade, but a column of pure divine fire that made the air around it shimmer with heat. "Then let us see how your newfound humanity serves you in battle." The first clash sent shockwaves across the rooftop that cracked concrete and shattered windows in the buildings beyond. Gabriel moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent millennia perfecting the art of celestial warfare, his blade cutting arcs of fire through the space where Kai had been standing. But Kai was no longer the angel who had followed orders without question. His movements carried something new, not just the trained reflexes of a warrior, but the desperate creativity of someone fighting for more than duty. He rolled, ducked, countered with strikes that came from angles Gabriel didn't expect. "You fight like a mortal," Gabriel observed, pressing his attack. "Sloppy. Emotional. I fight like someone who has something to lose," Kai replied, barely avoiding a strike that would have removed his head. Aaliyah watched the battle with the clinical focus she brought to medical emergencies, noting details that might matter. The way Kai favored his left side, the gradual brightening of Gabriel's fire sword, the increasing desperation in both combatants' movements. But more than that, she could feel something building between her and Kai, the connection that had been forged in the moment they'd chosen to trust each other. The binding, she realized. Whatever happened between us in the hospital, it didn't break when he started fighting. She could sense his pain when Gabriel's blade scored across his shoulder. Could feel his determination when he managed to land a solid hit that sent the Archangel staggering backward. And underneath it all, flowing between them like electricity, was something that made her medical training obsolete and her heart race with possibilities she'd never imagined. Love. Not the gentle, safe emotion she'd thought it was, but something fierce and transformative and dangerous. Something that was about to change the rules of celestial combat forever. "Gabriel," she called out, her voice cutting through the clash of supernatural forces. "You're fighting the wrong battle." The Archangel paused mid-strike, his perfect features showing confusion. "Explain. You think this is about punishing rebellion? About maintaining divine authority?" Aaliyah stepped forward, moving closer to the combat circle despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "But it's not. It's about fear. Angels do not experience fear. Angels don't experience love either, but here we are." She gestured toward Kai, who had used Gabriel's distraction to catch his breath. "You're afraid that if one angel can choose love over obedience, others might do the same. You're afraid that the whole system might crumble if people start making their own choices about what's worth serving." Gabriel's fire sword flared brighter. "The divine order has maintained the balance between creation and chaos for millennia. And how's that working out?" Aaliyah asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your divine order just sent an army to kill sick people because one of your angels grew a conscience." The truth of her words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be answered. Around the rooftop's perimeter, the assembled seraphim shifted uncomfortably, their perfect formations wavering for the first time. "Enough," Gabriel snarled, raising his sword for a strike that would end the combat permanently. But as the blade descended, Aaliyah did something that violated every rule of angelic warfare. She stepped into the circle, placing herself between Gabriel's sword and Kai's heart. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. She could see the shock on Gabriel's face as he tried to halt a strike that had already committed to its path. Could see Kai's desperate lunge to push her out of harm's way. Could feel the searing heat of divine fire as it approached her very human, very mortal flesh. And in that moment between heartbeats, between choice and consequence, something unprecedented happened. The connection between her and Kai exploded into visibility. Not just an emotional bond, but something physical, real, undeniable. Golden light erupted from their joined souls, creating a barrier that divine fire couldn't penetrate. Gabriel's sword struck the barrier and simply stopped. Not deflected or absorbed, but gently, firmly rejected by a power that predated divine authority. "Impossible," the Archangel breathed. "Not impossible," said a new voice from the edge of the rooftop. "Just unprecedented." They turned to see a figure that made even Gabriel step backward in recognition. Michael the Archangel, commander of heaven's hosts, Gabriel's superior in the celestial hierarchy. But this wasn't the Michael of divine authority and unquestioning obedience. This was someone who looked tired, confused, and perhaps a little afraid. "Michael," Gabriel said carefully, "I was executing the Council's directive." "The Council's directive," Michael interrupted, "was written before we understood what we were dealing with." He gestured toward Aaliyah and Kai, who still stood within the golden light that had saved them both. "This isn't rebellion, Gabriel. This is evolution." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Michael replied, moving closer to examine the barrier of light, "that in 4,000 years of celestial service, I've never seen anything like this. A human soul and an angelic essence merged through choice rather than divine decree. Love that creates power instead of consuming it." He looked directly at Gabriel, his ancient eyes reflecting depths of consideration that had shaped the fate of worlds. "I mean that maybe we've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of how do we stop this, perhaps we should be asking, what can we learn from it?" The golden light around Aaliyah and Kai began to pulse, growing brighter with each beat of their synchronized hearts. Where it touched the hospital's roof, cracks in the concrete healed. Where it reached the assembled seraphim, their rigid formations softened into something more organic, more alive. The child, Gabriel said suddenly, understanding dawning on his perfect features. Emma Martinez. The one Kai refused to eliminate. She's part of this, isn't she? She's part of what's coming, Michael confirmed. A new covenant between heaven and earth. One based on partnership instead of dominion. And if we resist this change? Michael looked around at the transformed rooftop, at the light that had turned a place of conflict into something approaching sacred ground. Then we become irrelevant, he said simply. Love finds a way, Gabriel. It always has. The question is whether we help guide it or get swept aside by it. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. Not the quiet of conflict, but the pause before transformation. Around them, Birmingham spread out in all directions. A city full of people who had no idea that the fundamental relationship between heaven and earth was being renegotiated on a hospital rooftop. So, Aaliyah said, her voice carrying a note of cautious hope, what happens now? Gabriel lowered his sword, the divine fire diminishing to a soft glow. Now, he said, we learn. All of us. He looked at Kai, his expression shifting from judgment to something that might have been curiosity. Brother, you've chosen a path none of us have walked. But perhaps it's time we discovered where it leads. The golden light around Aaliyah and Kai began to expand, encompassing the entire rooftop, reaching toward the sky where stars were returning to their normal patterns. And in that light, something new was being born. Not the end of divine order, but its transformation into something richer, more complex, more alive. Love, they were all learning, wasn't the opposite of power. It was power's truest expression. The golden light had settled into something sustainable, warm enough to keep the late October chill at bay, but gentle enough not to hurt mortal eyes. Aaliyah sat on the concrete ledge beside Kai, her hands still clasped in his, marveling at how normal it felt to be having a conversation with two archangels under a sky that hummed with celestial energy. 6 hours ago, she thought, my biggest problem was Dr. Hartman's attitude. Now I'm apparently part of some cosmic revolution. Tell me about Emma, she said to Michael, who had taken a position across from them with the patient air of someone settling in for a long explanation. The whole story. Michael's expression grew thoughtful, ancient eyes reflecting memories that span millennia. Emma Martinez isn't just gifted, Dr. Johnson. She's what prophecy calls a bridge, a soul born with the ability to connect different realms of existence. Different realms? Heaven, earth, and everything in between. For 4,000 years, these realms have been kept separate by divine law. Mortals serve heaven, angels enforce heaven's will, and the barriers between worlds remain absolute. He gestured toward the light surrounding her and Kai. But Emma's very existence suggests that those barriers were never meant to be permanent. Gabriel, who had been unusually quiet since sheathing his sword, finally spoke. The council has records of previous bridges. 7 throughout history. All were. He paused, choosing his words carefully. All were eliminated as threats to divine order. Murdered, Kai said bluntly. Call it what it was. Yes, Gabriel agreed with visible discomfort. Murdered. Because we believed that maintaining separation was more important than allowing evolution. Aaliyah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. 7 children, killed because they were born different. 7 children whose deaths may have delayed humanity's spiritual development by centuries, Michael added. We told ourselves we were preserving stability, preventing chaos. But looking at you two, seeing what's possible when love creates connection instead of authority enforcing separation. He trailed off, staring at his hands as if seeing them clearly for the first time. You're having doubts, Aaliyah observed with the same clinical directness she'd once used to diagnose medical conditions. I'm having revelations, Michael corrected, about the difference between serving God and serving a system that claims to speak for God. The admission hung in the air like incense, impossible to ignore or take back. Around them, the assembled seraphim shifted uncomfortably, their perfect certainties beginning to crack under the weight of questions they'd never been allowed to ask. Emma knows, Kai said suddenly. About us, about what happened here. I can feel her awareness, like she's watching through some kind of spiritual telescope. Of course she knows, Gabriel replied. Bridges can sense disturbances in the cosmic order from across the globe. Every time we use divine authority to enforce separation, she feels it. Every time someone chooses love over fear. He looked meaningfully at Aaliyah and Kai. She feels that too. Is she safe? Aaliyah asked. For now. Her grandmother Rosa is formidable. Former Catholic nun, trained in spiritual warfare. The kind of woman who would face down the devil himself if he threatened her granddaughter. Michael's smile was genuine for the first time that night. But Emma won't stay hidden forever. Bridges are born to build connections, and eventually, she'll start reaching out to others like her. Others like her? Children being born with gifts that don't fit the old categories. Healers who can mend souls as well as bodies. Prophets who dream in colors that don't exist. Empaths who can feel the emotional state of everyone in a city block. Gabriel's voice carried a note of wonder. We've been tracking the births for 3 years now. 17 confirmed, probably twice that many we haven't found yet. Aaliyah absorbed this information with growing amazement. You're talking about a whole generation of gifted children. We're talking about the next step in human evolution, Michael said. And every time the council sends agents to investigate these children, every time we try to catalog and control their abilities, we're fighting against the very change we're supposed to be shepherding. So what do you do instead? Kai asked. The question was directed at Michael, but it was Gabriel who answered. We learn, he said simply. We admit that 4,000 years of absolute authority might have made us inflexible. We accept that love might be a better teacher than fear. He stood slowly, his massive wings folding against his back as he moved to the edge of the rooftop. Below them, Birmingham was beginning to stir with the earliest signs of dawn. Emergency vehicles responding to the hospital's power fluctuations, news crews setting up to cover what they assumed was a routine electrical failure. The council won't accept this easily, Gabriel continued. Too much of their identity is built on being the final arbiters of divine will. But tonight has shown them something they can't ignore. Which is, that their final arbiter just chose love over authority, he said, looking back at Kai with something that might have been pride. And that the result wasn't chaos or destruction, but creation of something beautiful. The golden light around Aaliyah and Kai pulsed gently, as if responding to Gabriel's words. In that pulse, she felt something extraordinary, not just her connection to Kai, but a sense of being part of something larger. A network of souls choosing love over fear, connection over separation, growth over stagnation. I can feel them, she whispered. The children, Emma and the others. They're all connected somehow. Through you, Michael realized. The binding between you and Kai isn't just personal, it's creating a new kind of spiritual network. One that doesn't require divine hierarchy to function. A network based on choice instead of command, Kai added, understanding dawning in his storm-gray eyes. No council of 7 making decisions for everyone. No angels enforcing absolute authority. Just souls connecting with other souls based on love and mutual recognition. That's terrifying, Gabriel said. That's beautiful, Aaliyah corrected. The two statements hung in the air, representing the fundamental divide that was reshaping the relationship between heaven and earth. Fear of change versus hope for growth. Control versus trust. The old covenant versus something unprecedented. There's something else, Michael said, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. Something the council doesn't know yet, but Emma's grandmother does. He pulled out what looked like a smartphone, though it glowed with soft inner light that suggested divine technology rather than human engineering. This is a message Rosa Martinez sent through her church's prayer network 3 hours ago, just as your binding was taking place. He touched the screen and Emma's voice filled the air, not recorded, but somehow present, as if the 7-year-old was speaking directly to them across hundreds of miles. Abuela Rosa, tell them I'm ready. Tell the angel who chose love and the nurse who chose courage that it's time to come home. We have work to do. The message cut off, leaving them in silence that was broken only by the distant sound of the city waking up below. She wants us to come to Detroit, Aaliyah said. She wants us to help her build something, Kai corrected. A sanctuary for the gifted children. A place where they can grow into their abilities without fear of divine retribution or human persecution. A bridge, Michael said with growing excitement. Not just between heaven and earth, but between what was and what could be. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind processing implications that stretched across centuries of carefully maintained order. If we do this, he said finally, if we help instead of hinder, the council will consider it open rebellion. Then I guess it's time to choose what we're rebelling against, Aaliyah replied. The old system that required the murder of innocent children? or the possibility of something better. The archangel looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just a mortal who had interfered in celestial affairs, but someone who had risked everything to save a stranger and somehow created a new kind of divine power in the process. "Dr. Johnson," he said formally, "would you accept the protection and partnership of heaven's hosts in this endeavor?" "It's Nurse Johnson," she corrected with a smile. "And yes, Gabriel, I would be honored to work with angels who are brave enough to choose love over fear." Around them, the assembled seraphim began to kneel, not in worship or submission, but in recognition of something new being born. The golden light expanded one more time, encompassing the entire hospital, healing systems that had been damaged by supernatural forces and blessing everyone within its reach. And somewhere in Detroit, a 7-year-old girl with prophetic dreams felt the change ripple across the spiritual landscape and smiled. The revolution had begun. But more than that, the healing had started. The house on Corktown's Porter Street looked ordinary enough from the outside. A Victorian-era two-story with peeling paint and a garden that had seen better decades. But as Aaliyah climbed the front steps beside Kai, she could feel the extraordinary energy that pulsed from within its walls. Not the overwhelming divine fire of angels in full power, but something warmer, more human, more sustainable. Love made manifest in the form of sanctuary. "You nervous?" Kai asked, his hand finding hers automatically. In the 2 weeks since the confrontation on the hospital rooftop, they'd grown used to the constant connection between them. Not just emotional, but spiritual. A bond that let them share strength when one was weak and joy when the other was healing. "Terrified," Aaliyah admitted. "I'm about to meet a 7-year-old who can apparently rewrite the laws of reality, and her grandmother who stared down the Catholic Church to protect her. Plus whatever other gifted children they've gathered here. Don't forget the angels who are probably still figuring out how to be helpful instead of intimidating." Before either of them could knock, the front door swung open to reveal a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, kind eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested she'd faced down her share of impossible situations and won. "Rosa Martinez," she said, extending a hand that was warm and calloused from gardening. "And you must be the nurse who started a revolution by refusing to abandon her patient." "Aaliyah Johnson," she replied, accepting the handshake and feeling immediately welcomed by this woman who radiated the same fierce protectiveness she'd seen in the best charge nurses. "Though I think the revolution was already starting. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Abuela Rosa," a voice called from inside the house, followed immediately by the sound of running feet. Emma Martinez burst through the doorway like a small tornado of energy and excitement, her dark hair in pigtails and her 7-year-old grin missing 2 front teeth. But it was her eyes that stopped Aaliyah in her tracks. Ancient eyes in a child's face, depths that suggested she'd seen the beginning and end of things and found both equally fascinating. "You came." Emma threw her arms around Aaliyah's waist with the unself-conscious affection that only children possessed. "I saw you in my dreams, but seeing you in person is so much better." "Hello, Emma," Aaliyah said, kneeling to the girl's eye level. "I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope." Emma replied with a giggle that was pure 7-year-old mischief. Then her expression grew more serious as she looked at Kai. "Uncle Kai, you look different. Happier." "I feel different," Kai admitted. "Turns out falling from grace was the best thing that ever happened to me." "That's because it wasn't really falling," Emma said with the absolute certainty that only prophets and children could manage. "It was growing wings that work better." She grabbed both their hands, tugging them toward the house with the impatience of someone who had important things to show them. "Come on. Everyone's here for the meeting." "Well, not everyone. Some of the kids are still traveling with their families, and Michael said he might be a little late because Gabriel is still arguing with the council about proper procedure for unauthorized divine intervention." She air-quoted the phrase with the precision of someone who'd heard it used many times recently. The interior of the house was a comfortable chaos of mismatched furniture, children's artwork covering every available wall surface, and the kind of warm, lived-in feeling that spoke of a home where people were truly welcome. In the living room, Aaliyah counted 8 children ranging in age from 5 to 16, all with the particular intensity in their eyes that marked them as something more than ordinary. "Aaliyah, Kai," Rosa said, moving into hostess mode with practiced ease. "Let me introduce you to our extended family." She gestured toward a girl of about 12 who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by flowers that definitely hadn't been there when they'd entered the room. "This is Sophia. She can make plants grow with just her touch." And I can make them sing. Sophia added cheerfully, demonstrating by brushing her fingertips across a daisy's petals. The flower responded with a soft, melodic hum that was hauntingly beautiful. Marcus, Rosa continued, indicating a teenager who was sketching in a notebook with intense concentration, can see the future through his artwork. He's been drawing pictures of this meeting for the past 3 days. Marcus looked up, his dark eyes serious beyond his years. I drew you arguing with an archangel, he said to Aaliyah. But then you both ended up laughing. I think that's a good sign. A little boy of about 6 waved shyly from behind the couch. That's David, Emma explained. He can hear people's thoughts, but only the happy ones. It makes him really good at cheering people up when they're sad. And this, Rosa said, her voice carrying special warmth, is Isabella. The girl who stepped forward looked to be about 10, with the kind of self-possession that suggested she'd grown up faster than she should have. But when she smiled, her whole face lit up with pure joy. I can heal things, Isabella said simply. Not just cuts and bruises, but broken hearts. Sad memories. The kind of hurt that lives inside people and makes them forget how to love. Aaliyah felt her breath catch. In all her years of nursing, she'd seen the kind of damage that Isabella was describing. The wounds that medication couldn't touch, the trauma that lived deeper than physical injury. To know that someone so young possessed the gift to heal those invisible hurts. That's incredible, she said. It's necessary, Isabella replied with matter-of-fact wisdom. There's a lot of broken hearts in the world. Too many people who forgot how to trust love because someone hurt them really badly. The words hit closer to home than Aaliyah had expected. She thought of her own journey, the years of carefully maintained emotional distance, the walls she'd built after David's violence, the way she'd convinced herself that safety was more important than connection. Speaking of healing, Emma said, tugging on Kai's sleeve, Uncle Michael and Uncle Gabriel are in the kitchen having what Abuela Rosa calls a spirited discussion about angel politics. You should probably go help them remember how to be brothers instead of just colleagues. Uncle Michael and Uncle Gabriel? Kai asked with amusement. Well, what else am I supposed to call them? They're family now, even if they're still figuring out how family is supposed to work. As if summoned by her words, voices drifted from the kitchen. Michael's patient baritone contrasting with Gabriel's more clipped tones in what sounded like a debate that had been ongoing for some time. The council wants documentation, Gabriel was saying. Formal reports on every manifestation of divine power, comprehensive psychological profiles of all gifted individuals, and a detailed plan for integration that doesn't violate existing celestial law. The council, Michael replied with unusual heat, can document this. There was a sound that might have been Gabriel choking on whatever he'd been drinking. Did the commander of heaven's hosts just suggest that the Council of Seven engage in an anatomically impossible act? Gabriel asked. I suggested they focus on more important things than bureaucracy, while children are learning to reshape reality through love and creativity. Aaliyah and Kai exchanged glances, both trying not to laugh at the image of 2 archangels arguing about paperwork in Rosa Martinez's kitchen. Go, Rosa said with a shooing motion. They've been at this for an hour. Maybe fresh perspectives will help them remember why they're here. The kitchen was warm and bright, with the kind of lived-in comfort that spoke of countless family meals and important conversations. Michael sat at the table with what appeared to be a celestial tablet, while Gabriel paced by the window with the frustrated energy of someone accustomed to clear chains of command. Ah, Michael said, looking up as they entered. Reinforcements. Gabriel, explain to our human colleagues why the Council believes that love requires proper documentation in triplicate. I'm not defending the Council's position, Gabriel said with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. I'm trying to find a way to make this transition work without triggering a celestial civil war. What exactly is the Council's concern? Aaliyah asked, settling into a chair beside Michael with the same directness she'd once brought to difficult medical conversations. Gabriel stopped pacing, his expression growing more serious. They're afraid. For 4,000 years, divine authority has been absolute, unquestioned, unchangeable. Now they're faced with evidence that love can create power that doesn't require their permission or oversight. And that threatens their entire worldview, Kai observed. It threatens their entire existence, Gabriel corrected. If mortals can achieve divine connection through love and choice instead of obedience and fear, what purpose do the old hierarchies serve? Michael leaned forward, his ancient eyes reflecting depths of consideration. What if that's the wrong question? Meaning, What if instead of asking, what purpose do we serve, we start asking, what purpose should we serve? What if this change isn't about making the council obsolete, but about helping them evolve into something better? The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Through the kitchen window, Aaliyah could see the children in the backyard. Sophia helping David's flowers grow, while Isabella worked with a newcomer who looked like he'd been crying until very recently. Healers, she said suddenly. Guides. Teachers instead of enforcers. Explain, Gabriel said. In the hospital, the best doctors weren't the ones who made all the decisions for their patients. They were the ones who helped patients understand their options and supported whatever choice the patient made. Aaliyah looked between the two archangels, seeing millennia of ingrained hierarchy warring with the possibility of something more collaborative. What if angels became consultants instead of commanders? Available for guidance when requested, but not making unilateral decisions about what's best for humanity. That would require the council to trust mortals to make good choices, Gabriel said. Yes, Michael replied simply. It would. And if they make bad choices? Then they learn from the consequences and make better choices next time, Kai said. The same way everyone learns. The same way I learned when I finally said no to an order that violated everything I believed love should be. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, processing concepts that challenged the foundation of everything he'd known. Outside, Emma's laughter drifted through the window as she taught the newest arrival how to make flowers dance. There's something else, he said finally. Something I haven't told the council yet. What? The other realms are watching. Heaven isn't the only cosmic authority that's been maintaining barriers between worlds. If we change our approach, if we choose partnership over dominion, he looked out at the children playing in the garden. Others will follow, or they'll resist violently to prevent the change from spreading. So we're not just talking about a new relationship between heaven and earth, Aaliyah said. We're talking about a complete transformation of how all the cosmic forces interact. Yes, the weight of that realization settled over the kitchen like a blanket. They weren't just helping gifted children or reforming angelic bureaucracy. They were potentially triggering the largest shift in cosmic order since creation itself. Are you afraid? Michael asked Gabriel directly. Gabriel considered this, his perfect features reflecting emotions that angels supposedly didn't experience. Terrified, he admitted, but also excited. For the first time in millennia, I don't know what happens next. And somehow that feels like hope. Through the kitchen window, they watched as Emma helped a shy 5-year-old named Anna discover that she could make rainbows appear when she laughed. The other children gathered around in delight, their gifts complementing and enhancing each other in ways that created something beautiful and entirely unprecedented. Look at them, Rosa said, entering the kitchen with a tray of coffee and homemade cookies. They're not afraid of their abilities. They're not competing for divine approval or trying to prove they're worthy of love. They're just being themselves. Together. That's what we're fighting for, Aaliyah realized. Not just acceptance of the gifted children, but a world where everyone can be themselves without fear of judgment or persecution. A world, Kai added, where love is seen as strength instead of weakness. Where connection is valued over control. Gabriel moved away from the window, his decision crystallizing in real time. Then we'd better make sure we win. He pulled out his own celestial communication device, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. What are you doing? Michael asked. Sending a message to the council, Gabriel replied. Requesting an emergency session to discuss new protocols for divine intervention in mortal affairs. And if they refuse? Gabriel's smile carried echoes of the warrior he'd been before administrative duties had dulled his edges. Then we remind them that free will applies to angels too. And that some of us have decided to choose love over law. The device chimed softly as the message was sent, carrying with it the potential to reshape the relationship between heaven and earth forever. Outside, Emma looked up from her rainbow-making lesson and waved at the kitchen window, her 7-year-old grin bright with the knowledge that sometimes the most important revolutions started in suburban kitchens with cookies and coffee and the simple decision to choose hope over fear. 3 days later, the council chambers, celestial realm. The Council of Seven convened in a space that existed outside normal reality, a circular chamber carved from crystallized starlight, where the voices of cosmic authority had shaped the fate of worlds for 4 millennia. But today, for the first time in recorded history, the chamber echoed with something unprecedented: dissent. Gabriel stood in the center of the circle, his formal report floating in holographic text around him like accusations written in fire. To his right, Michael maintained the rigid posture of military discipline, though Aaliyah, watching through the spiritual connection that bound her to Kai, could sense the tension coiled in every line of his celestial form. The other 5 members of the council sat in judgment like statues carved from divine authority itself. Raphael, Uriel, Raguel, Ramiel, and at their head Metatron, the voice of the Almighty, whose word carried the weight of absolute law. "Explain," Metatron commanded, his voice resonating through dimensions that mortal minds couldn't comprehend. "How 2 of our most trusted commanders came to advocate for the complete dissolution of celestial hierarchy." "We're not advocating dissolution," Michael replied with careful precision. "We're proposing evolution." "You're proposing chaos," Uriel interjected, his perfect features reflecting millennia of rigid order. "The barrier between mortal and divine exists for a reason. Remove it, and you invite catastrophe." "The barrier is already dissolving," Gabriel said, gesturing toward the floating reports that detailed every manifestation of the children's gifts. Emma Martinez's prophetic abilities grow stronger every day. Sophia Chen can now accelerate plant growth at the cellular level. Isabella Santos healed a man's 20-year addiction to alcohol by touching his hand and showing him what love felt like. "Aberrations," Raguel declared. "Genetic anomalies that will fade as the children mature and their mortal limitations assert themselves." "No," a new voice said from the chamber's entrance. "They won't." Emma Martinez walked into the council chambers like she belonged there, her 7-year-old form somehow managing to command the attention of beings who had witnessed the birth of galaxies. She was accompanied by Rosa, whose presence in the celestial realm should have been impossible, but who seemed entirely unimpressed by divine architecture. "Hello," Emma said politely to the assembled archangels. "Thanks for letting us come to your meeting. Abuela Rosa says it's important to be respectful when you're visiting someone else's house." The silence that followed was absolute. In 4,000 years of existence, no mortal had ever simply walked into the council chambers. The protective barriers, the dimensional locks, the very nature of the space itself should have prevented such intrusion. "Impossible," Metatron breathed. "Not impossible," Emma replied cheerfully. "Just different. That's what I came to explain. The barriers you made to keep mortals and angels separate? They don't work anymore. Love found a way through." She gestured toward Gabriel and Michael, then seemed to look directly through dimensional space at Aaliyah and Kai, who were watching from Rosa's kitchen in Detroit. Uncle Gabriel and Uncle Michael learned something important. They learned that when you choose love over fear, you don't lose power, you gain it. And when you gain it together, with friends and family who trust each other, you can do things that nobody thought were possible. "Child," Ramiel said with forced patience, "you do not understand the complexities of cosmic order." "I understand that you're scared," Emma interrupted with the blunt honesty that only children possessed. "I understand that for a really long time, you've been in charge of everything, and now things are changing, and you don't know how to be in charge of change." Rosa stepped forward, her grandmother's authority somehow holding its own against cosmic beings who could unmake solar systems with a thought. "My granddaughter is trying to offer you a partnership," she said firmly. "You can be part of what's coming, or you can fight it. But you can't stop it." "And why?" Metatron asked with deceptive calm. "Should we not simply exercise our divine prerogative and end this anomaly?" Emma's expression grew sad, the weight of prophetic knowledge settling over her child's features like an adult's cloak. "Because if you try to stop love by using fear and violence, you'll break something that can't be fixed," she said quietly. "You'll shatter the connection between heaven and earth so completely that neither realm will ever recover." She waved her hand, and the air in the council chamber filled with images. Not holographic projections, but visions of possible futures rendered in colors that had no names. The first showed Earth as it was now, with the gifted children growing into their abilities, healing trauma and bridging differences between communities that had been divided for generations. Angels working alongside humans as counselors and guides, their wisdom offered freely rather than imposed through authority. The second showed a different path. Angels descending en masse to eliminate the aberrant children, their divine fire turning cities to ash as they attempted to restore the old order by force. But instead of compliance, their actions sparked something worse. A complete severing of the spiritual connection between realms, leaving both heaven and earth diminished and alone. "In the first future," Emma said, her 7-year-old voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "everyone grows. Angels learn how to love without controlling. Humans learn how to reach for the divine without surrendering their free will. And children like me get to become bridges instead of targets. And in the second, Uriel asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. In the second future, love dies. On both sides. And the cosmos becomes a very cold, very lonely place. The visions faded, leaving the council chambers in silence that stretched across dimensions. Aaliyah, watching through her connection to Kai, felt the weight of decision pressing down on everyone present. Not just the future of the gifted children, but the fundamental nature of existence itself hung in the balance. There is a third option, Metatron said finally, his voice carrying undertones that made reality itself vibrate. Compromise. The children are allowed to develop their abilities under careful celestial supervision. Angels maintain their authority, but exercise it with restraint. That's not compromise, Rosa said with the firmness of someone who'd raised children and understood the difference between guidance and control. That's just a prettier cage. Then what do you propose, mortal? I propose, Emma said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who'd seen this conversation play out in 100 prophetic dreams. That we stop pretending anyone is in charge of love. She gestured around the council chamber, encompassing divine authority and human determination in a single sweeping motion. Love isn't something you can manage or control or regulate. It just is. It grows when people choose to trust each other. It heals when people choose to help each other. It creates when people choose to build something together instead of tearing things apart. You're asking us to abdicate our responsibility for maintaining cosmic order, Raguel protested. I'm asking you to trust that love creates better order than fear ever could, Emma replied. And then, with the casual inevitability of a child who'd never been taught that some things were impossible, she did something that changed everything. She reached out with her small hand and touched Metatron's perfect form. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Light exploded through the council chamber. Not the harsh radiance of divine authority, but something warmer, more alive. Where Emma's mortal touch met the voice of the Almighty, a new kind of connection blazed into existence. For the first time in 4,000 years, Metatron felt human emotion not as a foreign concept to be understood intellectually, but as a lived experience. Love, fear, hope, grief, joy, all of it flooded through his consciousness like a tsunami of feeling that unmade and remade his understanding of existence. And through him, the experience cascaded to the other council members, to every angel in the celestial hierarchy, to the very foundations of divine order itself. Heaven learned in a single moment what it felt like to love without condition and be loved in return. The effect was transformative, and for some, it was devastating. Enough! Uriel roared, divine fire erupting from his form as he rejected the flood of human emotion with violent force. This is corruption. Contamination. The child is a weapon designed to destroy everything we've built. He raised his hand, celestial energy gathering for a strike that would unmake Emma's existence across all possible timelines. But before he could release it, Gabriel stepped between them, his own power flaring to create a barrier of protection around the little girl who'd just changed the nature of reality. Brother, he said quietly, you're afraid. I understand. We're all afraid. But fear isn't a reason to murder a child. She's not a child, Uriel snarled. She's an infection. A virus designed to destroy the purity of divine purpose. She's family, Michael said, moving to stand beside Gabriel. And we protect family. The council chamber erupted into chaos as millennia of repressed doubt and buried questions exploded into open conflict. Raphael and Ramil moved to support Uriel's position, their combined power creating a maelstrom of divine fire that threatened to tear the chamber apart. Raguel hesitated, caught between ancient loyalty and newly awakened understanding. And at the center of it all, Emma stood perfectly calm, her small hand still touching Metatron's form, her 7-year-old face reflecting depths of compassion that had taken root in the heart of heaven itself. It's okay, she said to Uriel, her voice somehow carrying through the cosmic storm. Being scared is normal. Change is scary. But you don't have to be scared alone. I am not afraid, Uriel screamed, his attack launching with enough force to shatter planets. But it never reached Emma. Instead, it met a barrier that had never existed before, a wall of protection created not by divine authority or celestial power, but by love made manifest. Every angel who had chosen connection over control, every human who had ever shown kindness to a stranger, Every act of compassion performed in the name of something greater than self-interest combined into a force that divine fire couldn't penetrate. Uriel's attack didn't just fail. It was transformed, its destructive energy converting into something that healed instead of harmed. "Impossible," he whispered, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Not impossible," Emma said gently. "Just new. And new things take time to understand." She released her hold on Metatron and walked toward Uriel with the fearless confidence of a child who'd never learned that some people were too dangerous to approach. "Uncle Uriel," she said, "would you like to see what love really looks like?" The chamber held its breath as one of heaven's most rigid enforcers stared down at a 7-year-old girl who offered him a gift he'd spent 4 millennia learning not to want. His answer would determine not just Emma's fate, but the future of every soul in both heaven and earth. Time stopped. Not metaphorically, but literally. The fundamental flow of causality in the celestial realm froze as Uriel stared down at Emma's outstretched hand. Her 7-year-old face tilted up toward his with an expression of perfect trust. Around them, the council chamber hung suspended in crystalline silence. Divine fire paused mid-flight, ancient beings caught between heartbeats that had become eternities. In Detroit, Aaliyah felt the moment of suspension through her connection to Kai, her breath catching as she sensed the cosmic balance, teetering on the edge of something unprecedented. Through the spiritual link that bound her to the unfolding drama, she could feel Uriel's internal war. For 1,000 years of absolute certainty crashing against the simple offer of a child's love. "Don't do it, Uriel," she whispered, though she knew her words couldn't reach across dimensional space. "Don't let fear win." But Uriel wasn't hearing her words. He was hearing something else, the echo of every doubt he'd buried, every moment of compassion he'd suppressed, every time he'd wondered if divine authority was really the same thing as divine love. "She's just a child," a voice in his mind whispered. "A little girl who bakes cookies with her grandmother and makes rainbows when she laughs." "She's a weapon," another voice argued. "A tool designed to corrupt everything sacred about our purpose. She's offering you love. She's offering contamination. She's offering choice." And that, Uriel realized, was what terrified him most. For 4 millennia, he'd existed without the burden of choice. Orders came from above, he executed them below, and the chain of divine authority remained unbroken. Clean. Simple. Safe. But Emma's outstretched hand represented something infinitely more complex. The possibility that love might be more powerful than law, that connection might matter more than control, that the heart might sometimes be a better guide than the mind. "What if I'm wrong?" he thought for the first time in his existence. "What if everything I've believed, everything I've done in service to divine order? What if it was all just fear disguised as righteousness?" "Uncle Uriel," Emma said softly, her voice somehow penetrating the temporal suspension. "It's okay to be scared. But you don't have to stay scared." Time resumed with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. Uriel's hand, the same hand that had been gathering energy to unmake a child's existence, slowly, tremblingly, reached out to meet Emma's. The moment their skin touched, the council chamber filled with light that was somehow both gentle and overwhelming. Not the harsh radiance of divine judgment, but something that felt like sunrise after the longest night, like the first warm day of spring, like coming home after years of exile. Through their connection, Emma shared something with Uriel that no amount of celestial authority had ever taught him. What it felt like to be unconditionally loved. Not loved for his power or his perfect obedience or his usefulness to a cosmic hierarchy. Just loved for being himself, flawed, frightened, struggling to understand a universe that had suddenly become infinitely more complex than the rigid order he'd known. Uriel gasped, his perfect composure cracking as centuries of suppressed emotion flooded through him. For the first time since his creation, he felt the full weight of every choice he'd made, every life he'd ended in service to divine decree, every moment of compassion he'd denied himself and others. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears flowing down his perfect face. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. All those children before you, all the bridges I helped destroy because I was too afraid to let them build connections." "It's okay," Emma said, her small hand somehow large enough to hold all of his regret. "You didn't know then what you know now. But you know now, and that's what matters." Around them, the other council members watched in stunned silence as one of heaven's most rigid enforcers was transformed by the simple act of accepting love from a 7-year-old prophet. "This is what you've been trying to show us," Metatron said with dawning understanding. Not the replacement of divine order, but its completion. Love was always supposed to be the foundation, Emma agreed. Rules and hierarchy and authority, they're tools. But love is the purpose. And when you forget the purpose, the tools become weapons instead of instruments of healing. Gabriel stepped forward, his expression reflecting the same awe that Aaliyah felt watching from Detroit. The other realms, the ones you mentioned who might resist this change, will they understand what just happened here? Emma's expression grew more serious, the weight of prophetic knowledge settling over her features. Some will, some won't, and some will try to stop it by force because they're even more scared than Uncle Uriel was. How long do we have? Michael asked. Not long, Emma replied. The change is spreading faster than I expected. Every time someone chooses love over fear, every time an angel learns to trust instead of control, every time a human reaches for the divine without surrendering their free will, it sends ripples through all the realms. And the ones who oppose those ripples are already mobilizing. Emma looked directly at Uriel, her ancient eyes holding depths of compassion that belonged to someone infinitely older than 7. Uncle Uriel, I need to ask you something really important. Anything, he said without hesitation. Some of your friends from the other realms are going to come here. They're going to try to convince you that what just happened was wrong, that you should help them stop the change before it spreads any further. Uriel's jaw tightened with new resolve. And what would you like me to tell them? Tell them, Emma said with a smile that could have powered solar systems, that love is contagious, and that the best cure for fear is understanding what you're actually afraid of losing. The council chamber shuddered as reality itself registered the fundamental shift that had just taken place. Where there had been 7 members bound by rigid hierarchy, there were now 7 individuals united by choice and mutual recognition of something greater than authority. We'll need to prepare, Rugel said, speaking for the first time since Emma's arrival. If other realms are mobilizing against this change, we need to be ready to defend it. Not defend, Emma corrected gently. Demonstrate. The best way to show someone that love is stronger than fear isn't to fight them. It's to love them so completely that they remember what they were before fear made them forget. In Detroit, Aaliyah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched through the spiritual connection. The transformation she was witnessing wasn't just cosmic, it was deeply personal. Every act of courage she'd ever performed, every moment she'd chosen compassion over safety, every time she'd refused to let fear make her smaller had been leading to this. They're coming home, she said to Kai, who was watching beside her with expression of wonder and pride. Who's coming home? All of them. Emma, Rosa, Gabriel, Michael, they're coming back to Detroit. The council is going to establish a formal embassy here, to learn how partnership works instead of just theorizing about it. And the others? The forces that are mobilizing against the change. Aaliyah's expression grew determined. The same stubborn courage that had gotten her fired for saving a patient now focused on something infinitely larger. Then we show them what love looks like when it refuses to surrender, she said. We show them that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. Through the dimensional space that separated them, Emma looked directly at Aaliyah and smiled, an expression that carried the promise of challenges ahead, but also the certainty that they wouldn't face those challenges alone. Aunt Aaliyah, Emma's voice carried across impossible distances. Are you ready to help save the universe? Aaliyah thought of the children playing in Rosa's backyard, of the angels learning to choose love over law, of the infinite possibilities that opened when beings chose trust over control. I've been ready my whole life, she replied. I just didn't know it until now. And in the space between heaven and earth, between what was and what could be, the revolution that had started with a nurse saving a stranger transformed into something that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. Love, it turned out, really was contagious. And the infection was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. The house on Porter Street had grown. Not physically, though Rosa had somehow managed to fit 16 bedrooms, 4 kitchens, and a library that seemed to exist in 3 dimensions simultaneously into a Victorian home that municipal records insisted was only 2,400 square feet. The real growth was harder to measure but impossible to ignore. The sense of belonging that radiated from every board and brick, the way sunlight fell through windows at angles that defied physics to create perfect reading nooks, the garden that bloomed with flowers from every corner of the earth and several places that didn't technically exist. Aaliyah stood in what Emma had dubbed the angel wing, a section of the house where Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel had established their earthly residence. Through the window, she could see the backyard where 17 gifted children ranging in age from 4 to 16 were engaged in what looked like organized chaos, but was actually Isabella's emotional healing circle. Sophia was helping a new arrival, a boy named Marcus whose gift for seeing the future had left him paralyzed by the weight of too much knowledge. Grow a garden where each plant represented a different possibility rather than a fixed destiny. Emma sat cross-legged in the grass, teaching a group of younger children how to make rain clouds that only rained when people were sad and needed a good cry. David, now 8 and more confident than when he'd first arrived, was using his gift for hearing happy thoughts to help a teenage girl named Luna remember what joy felt like after years of depression. And in the center of it all, Uriel knelt beside a 5-year-old named Angel, a child whose gift for seeing the pain in others' hearts had nearly driven him to catatonic withdrawal, patiently explaining that feeling everyone's hurt didn't mean he had to carry it alone. Hard to believe that 6 months ago, he was ready to unmake Emma's existence, Kai said, appearing at Aaliyah's elbow with 2 cups of Rose's legendary coffee. Hard to believe that 6 months ago, I was just a nurse who kept her head down and followed protocols, Aaliyah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Now I'm apparently the chief liaison for interdimensional diplomatic relations. Who comes up with these titles? Emma. She says official titles make the paperwork easier when representatives from other realms come to visit. And how many representatives are we expecting this week? Kai consulted what looked like a normal tablet, but glowed with soft inner light. 3 delegations from the underworld. They're fascinated by the idea of redemption through love rather than punishment. 2 groups of what Gabriel calls neutral entities, cosmic forces that maintain the balance between order and chaos. And, he paused, his expression growing more serious, 1 delegation from the Void Courts. Aaliyah felt a chill that had nothing to do with Detroit's October weather. In the 6 months since the Council of 7 had chosen love over law, they'd received visitors from dozens of other realms. Some curious, some supportive, some openly hostile to the changes spreading throughout the cosmic order. But the Void Courts were different. They weren't just opposed to change, they were opposed to existence itself, viewing love and connection as weaknesses to be exploited. Emma says they're not coming to negotiate, she said. It wasn't a question. Emma says they're coming to test whether love really is stronger than entropy, Kai confirmed. And that the test will determine not just our future, but the future of every realm that's been watching to see if this new way of existing actually works. Through the window, Aaliyah watched Emma look up from her rain cloud lesson and wave directly at them, her 7-year-old grin bright with the kind of confidence that came from seeing possible futures and knowing which one was worth fighting for. She's not worried, Aaliyah observed. She's terrified, Kai corrected. But she's also certain that fear isn't a reason to stop trying to build something beautiful. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. Not the normal rumble of Detroit traffic, but the harmonized hum of machines that existed partially outside normal space-time. Through the front window, Aaliyah could see a convoy of vehicles that looked like luxury cars until you noticed they cast shadows in colors that didn't exist and left frost patterns on the pavement despite the warm afternoon. The Void Courts, she said. Right on schedule. Gabriel's voice came from behind them as he entered the room with Michael and Uriel. All 3 angels had adopted human forms that were almost indistinguishable from mortals, though their eyes still held depths that belonged to beings who'd witnessed the birth of stars. How do we handle this? Michael asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The same way we handle everything else, Rosa said, appearing in the doorway with the authority of someone who'd raised children and understood that most conflicts could be resolved with patience, clear boundaries, and really good food. We invite them in, we listen to what they have to say, and we show them that love doesn't mean being weak. The vehicles stopped in front of the house, their engines falling silent with synchronized precision. The doors opened and 5 figures emerged, tall, impossibly thin beings whose presence made reality itself seem less solid. They were beautiful in the way that winter storms were beautiful, perfect and terrible, and absolutely hostile to everything warm and alive. Lord Nihilus, Gabriel said quietly, recognizing the lead figure. High Adjudicator of the Void Courts. He's been pushing for our destruction since the moment Emma touched Metatron. What does he want? Aaliyah asked. Proof that love is just another form of chaos, Uriel replied, his voice carrying new understanding of concepts he'd once embraced. And permission to restore proper order by eliminating everything we've built here. Emma burst through the front door before any of the adults could stop her, Rosa close behind with the expression of someone chasing a particularly determined tornado. The little girl skipped down the front steps and approached the Void Court delegation with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. "Hello," she said brightly to Lord Nihilus, whose presence made the temperature drop 20 degrees. "I'm Emma. Welcome to our home. Are you here for the diplomatic meeting or the emotional healing circle? Because if it's healing, we should probably start with helping you remember what it feels like to be happy." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Nihilus stared down at the 7-year-old who'd just offered therapy to one of the most powerful forces in the cosmic order, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been amusement. "Child," he said, his voice like the sound of stars dying, "do you understand what I am?" "You're scared," Emma replied with the blunt honesty that had become her trademark. "Really, really scared. Probably the most scared person I've ever met. And I once helped a man who was afraid of his own shadow because it reminded him of his father." "I am not afraid," Lord Nihilus said with the kind of certainty that usually preceded cosmic destruction. "I am inevitable. I am the end of all things, the final silence that waits at the conclusion of every story." "No," Emma said thoughtfully, "you're definitely scared. I can see it in your colors, all gray and black and sharp edges where there used to be something bright. You're scared that if people keep choosing love over fear, there won't be a place for endings anymore." She stepped closer to the being who could unmake galaxies with a thought, her small hand reaching out with the same fearless trust she'd shown to Uriel. "But endings aren't bad," she continued. "Endings are just new beginnings in disguise. And the scary thing about new beginnings is that you don't know what's coming next." Lord Nihilus looked down at her outstretched hand, and for a moment, reality held its breath. "You offer me love," he said slowly, "knowing that my very nature is antithetical to everything you represent." "I offer you choice," Emma corrected. "Love is just what happens when you choose to see someone as family instead of enemy." Behind them, Aaliyah felt the weight of cosmic attention pressing down on the suburban street. Through windows and doorways, she could see the other children watching. Sophia gripping David's hand, Isabella standing protectively near young Angel, Marcus holding one of his future-seeing sketches that showed Emma surrounded by light. And she realized that this moment wasn't just about Emma and Lord Nihilus. It was about every soul in every realm watching to see if love really could transform the most fundamental force of ending and entropy into something new. "If I accept your offered connection," Lord Nihilus said carefully, "I risk losing everything that defines my existence." "Yeah," Emma agreed cheerfully. "Change is scary like that. But you know what's scarier than changing?" "What?" "Staying exactly the same forever and ever, until you forget why you existed in the first place." Lord Nihilus was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind processing concepts that challenged the foundation of his being. Around them, Detroit hummed with the ordinary life of a city going about its business, completely unaware that the fate of existence itself was being decided on a residential street corner. "I have spent eons," he said finally, bringing closure to stories that had forgotten how to end, providing the final silence for songs that had grown discordant. "I believe this was my purpose, to be the necessary ending that allowed new beginnings to emerge." "Maybe it was," Emma said. "But maybe your purpose is changing, just like mine did when I learned that being a bridge meant building connections instead of just predicting them." She wiggled her fingers invitingly. "Want to find out what comes after the ending?" Lord Nihilus stared at her hand for what felt like eternity. Then, with infinite care, he reached out and touched her fingertips with his own. The reaction was immediate and extraordinary. Instead of the cosmic destruction everyone expected, light exploded from their connection. Not the harsh radiance of divine authority or the cold precision of entropy, but something entirely new. The light of stories that refused to end, of love that transformed even the most fundamental forces of the universe, of possibilities that had never existed before but suddenly felt inevitable. Where the light touched Lord Nihilus, his void-black form began to shift and change, revealing something that had been hidden beneath eons of cosmic duty. Not emptiness, but potential. Not ending, but transformation. Not death, but the kind of rest that came before rebirth. "I remember," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "Before I became the force of ending, I was the force of completion, of fulfilled potential, of stories that reached their perfect conclusion because love had guided them home. You still are, Emma said with a smile that could have powered solar systems. You just forgot for a while. But that's okay. Everybody forgets sometimes. The important thing is remembering when it matters. Around them, the other members of the Void Court delegation were undergoing their own transformations, their hostile perfection melting away to reveal beings who had once been gardeners of possibility, shepherds of stories, guides for souls transitioning between one form of existence and another. This changes everything, one of them said, her voice filled with awe. This changes everything, Lord Nihilus agreed, looking around at the house where impossible children played impossible games and angels learned to laugh at their own cosmic importance. The question is, what do we do with the change? We build something beautiful, Aaliyah said, stepping forward to join the expanding circle. We show the universe that love isn't just stronger than fear. It's more creative than chaos, more transformative than destruction, more powerful than every force that tries to keep things separate and scared. We become family, Kai added, his hand finding hers automatically. We write new stories, Emma said, where everybody gets to choose their own ending, and every ending is really just the beginning of something even better. Lord Nihilus looked around at the assembled beings, angels and humans and entities that defied classification, all united by the simple decision to choose connection over separation. I accept, he said formally. On behalf of the Void Courts, I accept partnership in this new covenant. We will learn to be completion instead of termination, fulfillment instead of emptiness. The celebration that followed spilled out into the street, drawing neighbors and passers-by into a spontaneous block party that somehow included celestial beings and former forces of cosmic entropy. Someone produced Rose's famous tres leches cake. Gabriel discovered he had a gift for making children laugh by conjuring tiny rainbows from his fingertips. Uriel found himself in deep conversation with Mrs. Patterson from down the street about the theological implications of her prize-winning roses. And at the center of it all, Emma sat on the front steps with Lord Nihilus, teaching him how to blow soap bubbles that reflected not just light, but possibilities. Tiny spheres that showed glimpses of futures where love had won, where connection had triumphed over separation, where every soul in every realm had learned to see every other soul as family. So, Aaliyah said to Kai as they watched the impossible celebration unfold around them, "What happens now?" "Now," he replied, pulling her closer as the sun set over a Detroit street that had become the center of a cosmic revolution. "We keep building. We keep choosing love over fear. We keep showing the universe that some stories are too beautiful to end. And when the next impossible challenge shows up at our door, we invite it in for coffee and see if we can help it remember what it was before fear made it forget how to love." Aaliyah laughed, the sound mixing with children's giggles and angelic harmonies, and the gentle conversation of beings learning to be family instead of just allies. In the distance, other realms watched and wondered and slowly began to send their own representatives, not to negotiate or threaten or test, but to learn. To see if maybe, just maybe, there was room in this new universe for every soul who was brave enough to choose love over fear. And in a house that had grown to accommodate infinite possibility, Emma Martinez continued to build bridges between worlds, one heart at a time, one choice at a time, one impossible moment of connection at a time. Because some stories, she'd learned, were too important to ever really end. They just kept beginning, over and over again, each new chapter more beautiful than the last.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.